Welcome to War Room, the official podcast of the U.S. Army War College online journal, graciously supported by the Army War College Foundation. Please join the conversation at warroom.armywarcollege.edu. We hope you enjoy the program.
Greetings from the U.S. Army War College. I'm Jacqueline Whitt, Professor of Strategy and the War Room podcast editor, and you've joined us today for an episode of A Better Peace, the War Room podcast. And I think you're in for a real treat with today's program. I'm really pleased to welcome two new voices to the podcast to begin a series of episodes on the craft of writing about history and strategy. The host for today's podcast is Dr. Michael Neiberg, who is the Chair of War Studies here at the Army War College. He is a prolific writer whose books focus primarily on the history of the First World War and include a wide range of topics and are written for a variety of target audiences. He writes just as easily for academic specialists as for undergraduates and for the general public. His guest is Dr. Robert Citino, who is a longtime friend and colleague and a former Harold K. Johnson Chair of Military History at the War College. Rob is also a prolific and well-respected author and currently serves as the senior historian at the National World War II Museum. You're in store for a great conversation that covers a lot of ground, from the writing process to the significance of studying and writing military history in relation to current events, and to their love of books of reading, and even a really interesting discussion about footnotes. So we'll turn now to their conversation.
I'm Michael Neiberg, Chair of War Studies here at the U.S. Army War College, and I am delighted to have with me my good friend and one of the most respected historians working in the field, Rob Citino, who is the senior historian at the World War II Museum in New Orleans, Louisiana.
That would be the Samuel Zamuri Stone senior historian. I have to...
Thank you very much.
Yeah. All, what would say that? Full disclosure.
Full disclosure. And someone that I've known for a very long time. We've been good friends for a very long time. We taught here at the Army War College together. We were in the same seminar together. So Rob and I go way, way back. He's babysat my dog. So this is someone that...
How is Max?
Max is doing great. Thank you very much for asking. So this is someone that I deeply respect and deeply admire, and couldn't think of a better person to sit down and talk about writing and talk about the art of writing with than Rob Citino. So,
Thanks,
Rob, welcome back to Carlisle. Welcome back to one of your homes.
Yeah, one of my many homes. It's great to be here. 2013 to 2015, I taught alongside you here in the Department of National Security and Strategy. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah,
you got it.
And just it was a good 2 years. Learned a lot. Had some wonderful students. Made some great friendships, and got to hang out with you.
Yeah, it was a great couple of years.
Doesn't get any better, Mike.
So one of the things about your work that has always impressed me, you work on the German Army in the Second World War, which can be a very difficult subject. It can be something filled with mines, to borrow what's probably a very bad analogy. There's a lot of really bad work on the German Army in World War II. There's a lot of stuff about the German Army that is mythic or outright fictional. How do you, when you're dealing with this quite controversial subject, how do you organize your thoughts? How do you think about what you're going to work on? How do you take a topic as potentially difficult as that one and come up with the great historical work that you do?
Well, first of all, thanks for the kind words, Mike. But it's a good question, good series of questions, and I really do like the whole metaphor of writing about the Wehrmacht as a minefield. I'm going to remember that one from now on. It is. You know, I came up, got my PhD in 1984. At the time, it was the big Reagan military buildup. It was a lot of officers within the U.S. Army were thinking of, sort of post-Vietnam war fighting against the Soviet Union, big battalion fighting in the Fulda Gap and elsewhere. And, they were looking to historical sources for how to build a new doctrine for an army that was now teeming with new equipment and new technology. And, many pretty serious writers were looking back at the Wehrmacht at the time as a kind of model of a reforming institution, one which supposedly invented something called blitzkrieg. We can put that off to the side for a moment, but at the very least was amongst the first to do what we might consider modern combined arms operations. And there was sort of a Clausewitz revival in the U.S. Army as well. And naturally, those are the things I was reading when I came up as a graduate student. I'd always been interested in military history. There's maybe some psychological reason for that. People ask me, I say, well, my father fought in World War II. He was on Guadalcanal. But, where I grew up, west side of Cleveland, Ohio, born in 1958, everybody's father fought in World War II. So I had learned, did some foreign language work at Ohio State that would be the Ohio State University, TM. As an undergraduate, learned German, got pretty good at it, and so I wedded a natural interest in World War II to to a knowledge of the language. And that enabled me to read a lot of things that most American scholars simply weren't reading. And I soon came to a kind of realization in the 80s that the Germans were, neither hopeless at war, nor were they perfect at war, that they had evolved a doctrine and a vision for fighting wars that really went back many hundreds of years into the Prussian past. And so what the war the Wehrmacht fought was immoral and criminal. Whether it was immoral, I'll leave that to theologians. Bigger story, but it was certainly criminal, and many of their commanders were put in the dock for it. And no one can say anything good about the Wehrmacht's treatment of civilians or the atrocities that they carried out or the role it played in the Holocaust. But at the same time, you also can't deny that the Wehrmacht did pioneer a kind of new vision of modern mechanized military operations in the opening years of World War II that still basically define the field. I mean, when the U.S. Army today thinks of I call big battalion operations, I think everyone out there knows what I mean, a big conventional warfare based on combined arms. They're essentially, looking back to some of the sources of the Wehrmacht in 1938, 39, 40, 41. So the first couple years before the war and perhaps the next years of the war. So I'm not, I don't think Heinz Guderian was the greatest general of all time. I don't think Erwin Rommel was the greatest field marshal of all time. Probably at best a division or corps commander who kept getting promoted until he was incompetent at something, which was an army group commander. But I do think the military achievement of the Wehrmacht in those early years of the war is still worth looking at. So I think I'm able to write this with an almost complete... I've learned to write it with a complete absence of romanticism. At least that's what I'm striving for.
So were you aware in the 80s and early 90s that were you aware of the time period you were living in as well? I mean, all historians, I think we all understand this. You're writing about an historical time period, but you're also writing about the time period you're living through.
There's no doubt.
So you were conscious of this air-land battle, what the Army was thinking about, that there was something in this that could have present-day relevance.
There's no doubt about it. I published a book in 2004, I guess, called Blitzkrieg to Desert Storm, which essentially, while it has Blitzkrieg in the title, it was about the U.S. Army from 1940 to Operation Desert Storm and beyond. And so what I was reading the Military Review at the time, coming out of Leavenworth, and man, you practically needed a German-English dictionary to read Military Review. Kesselschlacht, Schwerpunkt, Auftragstaktik, talk about Clausewitz and the importance of Politik to waging war. I don't think there was any doubt. I don't see myself as an antiquarian. I see myself as a guy who lives in the present. I try to watch television because I think it's important to know where America is culturally. I try to listen to the most contemporary music I can find. My daughters made me do that. My students for 30 years made me do that. So I see myself as a guy who lives in the present, not an antiquarian. And I think that's really informed the way I write. I think it's informed the way I look at some of these questions. But I'll come back to one more time. A big reason I think my books, if they succeed, I think one of the reasons they succeed is that I try to ground them as much as possible in the German sources. Yeah,
so I did want to come to talk to the sources, but I wanted to come back. Not everybody in our profession sees the present as anything relevant to study at all. That is, there are plenty of historians who believe my job is to study this period of this place in this time period. It's not my job to connect it to the present at all. And it occurs to me, we have this challenge at the Army War College. We really don't want to hire those folks. We want to hire folks that are thinking the way that you are thinking, that
Sure.
Whatever you're writing about does connect to the present. So, not only is it another reason why you were such a great professor here, but it seems to me it's also a way of thinking about what Michael Howard said, that no human activity other than war is as similar through time.
Yeah.
I can't say it as pithily as he said it, but that war remains relatively constant through time.
We talked about the character of war, which changes all the time, the nature of the war, which is kind of constant and unchanging. I really like that dichotomy. I liked teaching. I liked teaching here the 2 years I was here, and primarily I liked teaching here because I felt there was almost no point to anything we were talking about unless it had some relevance to the present day. I would take issue with any historian. I understand how we get trained in graduate school, which is to be kind of narrow and learn our craft at a fairly narrow topic, and really kind of delve so deeply into it almost becomes an obsession. But I would take issue with someone who's been out for a while and has had a few books published and articles published and does the lecture circuit that you and I do, who thinks that historians should not have any relevance to the present, or that what historians do doesn't have any relevance to the present. I'd really take issue with that. I'm not sure why we do it then.
Yeah, I think the way you put it is perfect. Someone who's been out for a while, right?
Yeah.
When you're just trying to prove your chops, you're trying to make sure you understand how to do this, how to read evidence, how to construct an argument, how to place it within an historiography. That's one thing. But
Well, think about, I play guitar, so you learn scales.
Yeah.
If you want to play an instrument, doesn't matter what it is, play all the scales in every position, in every key, every day. Which is also a way of committing suicide slowly. It's very difficult. People pick up the guitar. I don't know. When I was a kid, you want to play "Smoke on the Water," but you have
which
to
I've seen you do,
which is something. But you have to get those fundamentals down. I understand this. I'm not arguing or advocating for a complete redo of the way we train historians, but I would, I'd urge all my fellow historians. You're men and women, smart people. You read 100,000 times more than the typical American or typical global citizen. You have perspectives of all sorts that most people just are unable really to generate themselves. And so I'd urge all scholars in whatever field of the humanities at least, to always be thinking of the present. I come back to it. I'm just not sure why we'd be doing this if it really was a museum piece, and as a museum employee, let me qualify what I mean by that. If it's something that's in a display case and is unchanging and doesn't really speak to the present day, I'm not even sure why a museum would do that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. So what's your writing process like? I know there are some writers who
Yeah, this is going to be good. I can't wait to describe this.
Well, let's start with some basics. I tend to write very concise bits of argument and then flesh things out as I go. Other people I know write a ton and then cut out the stuff, kind of like Michelangelo when he said he made David, right? He took a block of marble and then cut away everything that wasn't David.
Right.
Would you describe yourself as either of those or as something completely different?
Dizzy Gillespie also said it took him a whole lifetime of playing to learn what notes to leave
What
out.
notes to leave out, yeah, what notes not to play, right?
So less is more, there's arguments. Some people think more is more. I like to write in fully formed paragraphs. I really like to get flow. Yeah, I'll jot down some ideas, but I never have really written down anything that I would consider approaches a chapter outline in the classic sense that I know.
Oh, really? I do that all the time. So
I have an idea where I want this chapter to go, and it's in my mind. And then I really do try to write an intro to the chapter that excites me, that ends on some note of drama or anticipation or curiosity that makes people want to delve into the chapter. Now, admittedly, I just published my 10th book, Mike, so I consider myself an authority on my subject. I think, if I want to talk about the Wehrmacht and the Battle of Kursk, I have a pretty big body of information, pretty big body of data already in my mind. I'm trying to think of some way to present the Battle of Kursk, some way in which I look at the Battle of Kursk that is different than anybody else has. The only justification for writing a book, right, is that you have to have something to say. But for years now, I've really spent a lot of time on the craft of my writing, on things like rhythm, flow, word choice. We're writing about things that happened, so active verbs are very, very good. Avoiding the passive voice so it doesn't sound like you're writing a legal brief. No offense to all the wonderful lawyers I know. But no reason for delving into the passive voice any more than you have to. So I really do try to go for the flow. If I may, let me give you an example.
Sure.
In my last few books, I've started most of the chapters of my books with a little historical vignette. In other words, it's not a classic chapter opening, but it does, I think, present the problem that I want to discuss in the chapter. In one of the chapters in the Wehrmacht's Last Stand, I have Jodl, German operations chief, and he's counting up where his division. He's got 350 divisions in the field, and you think, well, that'd be enough to take care of almost anything. Of course, 250 of them are in the Soviet Union, and 30 of them are in Italy, and he's got 15 in the Balkans. And by the time he's thinking how to repel the great invasion in the West that he knows is coming, he's got 50 divisions more or less, and half of them are static divisions without any transport, and they're filled with foreign troops, so-called Eastern battalions. And he's got a real problem on his hands. And that's how I start the chapter on Germany defending against D-Day. I really just try to put the reader, we say in media res, right? You're in the middle of things. Now, not all my reviewers have enjoyed those vignettes. One reviewer said it's got no place in a history book, which seems to me to be overstepping your bounds as a history reviewer to set yourself up as the arbiter of what's acceptable and what's not. But got no place for that. I often write these in the historical present.
So was this a function, do you think? There is a weird conceit in our profession that if you're writing to a larger audience, that means you're not really saying anything, right? That's another academic conceit, that you should be writing to an audience of specialists.
Yeah.
Was this a function of that? Because I know you and I have both faced that.
Yes, we have both faced it. I do think, when I read the reviews, and I'm largely talking about the reviews in the scholarly journals, this is the place you might read something like that. And I was mentioning, so I write them in the historical present. Yodel grimaces as he looks at the list, right? It's in the present. I've been taken to task for that. That's got no place in historical writing. Julius Caesar's Civil War. He wrote most of his book, The Civil Wars, in the historical present.
Yeah, he would have gotten dinged by reviewer number 2. We both know that. We both know that.
Caesar, realizing his left is threatened, leaps into action and deploys the 9th Legion, or whatever. But of course, he's writing about himself in the third person as well. So I guess write in a way that's interesting to you. Write in a way that you think will be interesting to your readers. I thankfully work for a company now, the National World War II Museum, an institution that is dedicated to reaching the largest possible audience it can. So maybe, and so am I. And so maybe they've got the right man, and I've got the right place to work. We get about 750,000 visitors. I think that was the number for this last year. Maybe that's a lie. So let's say 700,000 plus. That's a lot of people. They're not scholars by and large. Some of them are, I suppose. But if you look at the modal visitor we get, they're not scholars. They love World War II. They're fascinated with it. They'll talk your head off about it all day. So it's not adulterating your art to try to reach as many of those people as possible. And again, that's something else I'd urge all our colleagues in the history business or in the humanities generally. Yes, we have evolved our own special lingo. We have our own professional language. And we need to do that. I understand. Like things like what is your argument? We say it. You know what I mean. Mm-hmm. I can see it in your eyes.
Of course. Yeah.
But most people, what is your argument? What's the problem? Why do you have an argument? We say arguably now, as in Hitler was arguably at fault for the Second World War, which means he probably was. And that's a very different way than most people use it. Arguably means probably not.
Yeah, it took me about a year of graduate school to figure that out. When we were talking about argument and we were talking about developing of an argument, that it was a positive thing to develop an argument.
Yes.
I bet it took me a good 8 months to figure out what that meant.
Like you, I probably went to graduate school still thinking a historian reported on the past.
Right.
Just, it's kind of like a chronicler.
Right.
What is your argument? What is your thesis? So we use those words, and I know we always will and we should use them, but at the same time we're using that historical professional language amongst ourselves. I don't think we should necessarily douse our readers in it at every turn. Once again, if you are a brand new PhD working your dissertation into your first monograph and it's going to be important to your career, disregard everything I'm saying.
Right, exactly.
Right now.
Yeah, you got to show your chops first.
Remember who you're writing that. First, you're writing your dissertation for 5 people or however many people on your committee, and then you're writing that first book for however many readers your chosen press is going to send it to. Try to hit the bigger audience later. It certainly didn't come overnight. I don't write in Rick Atkinson territory either in terms of hundreds of thousands of book sales and maybe more than that for his trilogy. But I've grown a little bit of a more of a popular audience perhaps than most historians.
But it is true. I mean, we don't get a lot of that as training as historians, how to write, especially not how to write for a popular audience. If you get training in how to write, it's how to write that narrow, jargonistic, argumentative prose. Like you said, arguing for a very small group. It's difficult, I think, to write the way that you write to reach a popular appeal, but yet still have the language is not maybe as technical as it would be for some other smaller projects, but the argument is still there, the ideas are still there, but the prose is readable, it's followable, it's decisive, it flows, all those things that you mentioned. Yeah. It's a difficult thing to do.
It's good. It's certainly good to hear that. I'll stack my footnotes up against anybody's. In terms of I've published 10 books, and they are scholarly books. My most recent last fall, the Wehrmacht's Last Stand. Even I was at some point saying, I think I'm getting carried away with these footnotes, but I'm trying to present in the footnotes that scholarly apparatus as someone who wants to reproduce my research or someone who wants to investigate some of these areas. If you want to know, the German language literature on the Ardennes Offensive, what we call the Battle of the Bulge, I recommend my footnotes to you. So I am writing scholarly books. That's been my bread and butter, and I presume it's going to be my bread and butter, for the rest of my career.
So that ties back to the issue of languages, because I face the same thing working in French sources. I want those footnotes. I almost think of the footnotes as another chapter. I want them. You could almost read them as a standalone thing, in part because I want to show what you want to show. I've done the work. I've been in those archives. I read those languages. I've done this. Yeah. So I think of the footnotes almost as another body of work. I mean, sometimes it's just a citation to find something,
Right.
but I use it as a kind of, okay, here's something else I want to talk about. Or
Something else I've been doing a lot in my footnotes. Hey, we're down in it now, aren't we? We're talking about footnotes.
yeah, we
I
are.
knew this
Yeah,
would
we
happen.
are. Sorry, dear listener.
Really, I'm hearing the sound of people switching off the podcast. One thing I try to do in footnotes, there's a lot of quotes. The German military history has generated a lot of magic quotes. Whether it's Clausewitz, the continuation of politics by other means, or whether it's Moltke saying no plan survives contact with the enemy's main body, Schlieffen, keep the right wing strong. It's a whole list of them. And I try to source them because they're never sourced, and sourcing those things can be a nightmare. The ones I just mentioned now, perhaps not as bad as some, but there's just so many. There's thousands of them in the course of my writing, and that's after I've written the manuscript and I've used that quote. And then the agony begins of sorting through my entire German language book collection to try to find what I consider to be the locus classicus, the sort of classical source for that. Because then somebody says it, somebody else says it, somebody else quotes that book, and it's quoting an English language book, which happened to use that phrase. But so I think that's particularly important too. That's one thing my footnotes do. They also outline the arguments, to use that term again, the arguments that have been generated by some of these great battles or some of the great campaigns that I'm writing about. I'm old school in many ways, Mike. In that I do write I don't think it's drum. I don't hear any drums and trumpets in my work, but I definitely write on battle and campaign. I find it fascinating, and I think I've had some insights that my readers have found interesting.
So you and I both learned that about sourcing quotations and taking back. I think we both learned that from our godfather, Dennis Showalter, who
no doubt.
Dennis taught me to do that. Don't just because everybody says that so-and-so said this, make sure that actually happened, no matter how common it is. So how do
Mike, I got to say this, though. You did a Festschrift. You edited a Festschrift for Dennis.
Maybe we better explain what that is. That's an edited book in honor of someone that
someone
we
who was
did.
very dear to you or important to your career. You get your friends together. You all write a chapter, and then Mike here. This is for Dennis Showalter. Mike and my dear friend Mike wrote the intro to it, and you asked me if I wanted to do that, and I said, "You bet I wanted to do it. I couldn't be happier."
Actually, what you said is, Mike, I'll do anything for my godfather, which I thought was the greatest email I ever received.
My godfather, you know that. But Dennis is a figure. If I could speak of Dennis Showalter for a moment, great German military historian. Dennis is a figure of absolutely towering intellect. I don't know quite anyone quite like him. Maybe there's a small handful, but he is also one of the funniest and liveliest writers you'll ever bump into. And so I guess when I was coming up, who did I want to be when I grew up? And I wanted to be Dennis Showalter.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm still, never will be, but I think I'm still kind of pursuing that. And, I don't doubt that that's probably something you've said to yourself.
Absolutely.
At one point or another.
He walks that balance beautifully. I mean, every book that he writes is scholarly, it's argumentative, it's making a case, but it's a delight to read. There's even bits of humor in it. Even if he's dealing with a very serious subject, he's got a touch for explaining who the people are. And I still find myself, when I'm talking about an Erich Ludendorff or a Erich von Falkenhayn, I'll use Dennis's description of these people to explain who these people are to my students.
Right. You know what? If you Dennis writing on Frederick the Great is if I had Dennis's book on the wars, I guess the campaigns of Frederick the Great. That's my desert island book.
Yeah. No.
So you can take one, right?
Absolutely. No. And I think I learned a lot from that. You can write in a human way for human readers rather than for a group of intellectuals or
I'll
so.
Shout out to one more person too. And since we're talking about how I came to think that this was important when clearly not, maybe everybody thinks it's important as I do. Good smooth writing, fun writing. I didn't have a Dr. Vater, as they say. I didn't have a male professor who oversaw my dissertation. I had a Dr. Mutter. Her name was Barbara Yelovich, an eminent professor at Indiana University, where I got my PhD. She was a very witty person and a very witty and smooth writer as well. And I remember reading her book on St. Petersburg and Moscow. It's Russian and Soviet foreign policy. And just, which, let's face it, that's not necessarily an exciting book to read.
Yeah.
Diplomatic history by nature is this country had an agreement with that country to do this if somebody else did that. It'd be very difficult. And Barbara's book on St. Petersburg to Moscow to me was just, I can pick it up right now. I have large parts of it memorized just because it's been so much a part of my mental universe for so long. But she was someone else who clearly thought it was important to write English in a smooth and interesting way. And God bless her.
Yeah. No, it's really important to have those books that you keep going back to. And so, what other writers, but were there non-academic writers that you learn from. For me, Joan Didion was an absolute model of someone who could paint a picture with a very few words, but really drive a meaning into something. Was someone that I remember reading her stuff and just thinking, if I could write 1/10 as good as she writes, I'll be in really good shape.
Let me be a little more lowbrow than you, Mike, which is kind of how our relationship goes anyway. Hunter S. Thompson.
Yeah.
When I was a little boy, maybe my brother told me to subscribe to Rolling Stone, or maybe I read his. And Hunter Thompson's work was being serialized in Rolling Stone. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail. So Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is kind of a fantasy about a lost weekend. In a way, it's the spiritual ancestor of the film with Bradley Cooper, where they go to Las Vegas. Do you know the name of the movie?
Yeah,
Hangover.
Yeah.
It's kind of the spirit. So, But then he wrote Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail about the Nixon-McGovern campaign of 72. Hunter Thompson invented what he called gonzo journalism, that it wasn't really important to say what happened so much as just to make a wild description of what happened and what that could have led to in some fantasy. So half the time you're not sure if it's real or if it's a kind of fantasy. I can pick up Hunter Thompson in almost any of his writings today and just begin laughing out loud. As my wife will testify to you, I'll read it out loud and she'll say, oh, here we go. I completely lose control and break down into laughter. I love Philip K. Dick as a science fiction writer. Dick's work was really advanced. You're never sure what plane of reality you're in. I guess our listeners right now would know him best. I guess this is true for Man in the High Castle. Man in the High Castle, the Amazon television program or film, is not, to me, not at all like the book. The Axis has won World War II. And the Germans are occupying the eastern United States, and the Japanese the western United States. There's a kind of semi-autonomous Rocky Mountain Republic in between them. And that's the TV program and also the Dick's work, the book. But that's where the similarities kind of depart. Dick's work is a look at the small ways that history could be changed radically. And maybe there's millions of histories existing simultaneously, all based on these tiny deviations in what we consider to be the historical time stream. So, as many of our readers will know, Dick there's a resistance movement of sorts growing in the Rocky Mountain Republic, and someone there has written a subversive book, in which the Allies have won the war. So this is a book about the Axis winning the war, in which someone has written a book that the Allies won the war.
Yeah, I'm not a science fiction guy, so I don't know this stuff.
I could just go for that. James Blish was one of the great writers of hard science fiction. Dick was a writer of that book, at least, was alternate history. James Blish wrote, heavy science fiction about new propulsion systems that would allow man to go to the stars and that sort of thing. So, Mike, if I have one of those slots on my schedule when I don't have to read the memoir of another German Panzer Division commander in the original German, I'm usually trying to find some science fiction or fantasy, and also just to shout out J.R.R. Tolkien. Not so much The Hobbit, but the famous trilogy, which begins with Fellowship of the Ring. Those are books that I have continued to read. At Christmas, I'll also read A Christmas Carol. I read A Christmas Carol once a year.
Great.
And cry.
Well, we're almost at the end, so I want to finish with two questions that I'm going to try to ask everybody that I talk to on this podcast. What are you reading right now?
I'm in a reading jag right now. Which means I'm reading as much as I can. I get in these phases where I just can't pick enough books up. And I've already mentioned Julius Caesar's The Civil War. I just finished it. I know a little bit of Latin, so I have the Loeb Classic. It's got the Latin on the left side and the English on the right. But the book I have in my bag right next to me at the moment, so the book I'm reading right now is Thomas Merton, the great monk, a Trappist monk who was a contemplative, that he had sworn a life of silence and prayer. Well, he also wrote 1 million letters in the course of his life. And from October 1961 to October 1962, a time when it looked like the Earth was about to be blown off its axis in a thermonuclear war, he wrote a number of letters to influential individuals and friends in society, politics, the church, urging them to stand together and as one in human solidarity and do something about this problem that threatened to kill us all. The book is the letters have been collected, and the volume is called Cold War Letters. The Cold War Letters of Thomas Merton.
I'm gonna have
so
to
he's
read
writing
this.
Leo Szilard, one of the inventors of the hydrogen bomb. He's writing Clare Boothe Luce. He's writing fellow monks in different monasteries. Ethel Kennedy. Fascinating stuff.
I'm going to have to read that one. So the last question I'm going to ask everybody that comes through and does this, and I hope we'll either get a consensus or we'll get a nice long list. What is your favorite bookstore?
That's a good one. Well, I still have one in my memory for the most part. It's a tough question nowadays, Michael.
There aren't that many.
So few standing, but I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and downtown Cleveland, Ohio, Prospect Avenue, I believe. There was a woman named Rachel Cohen, Mrs. K, we called her, and K's bookstore was a multi-store extravaganza. When I think of going into Kay's bookstore, I could still get a thrill today. I didn't know what I was going to come out with. It might be a book on Paris and the Commune. It might be a book on the history of the Cleveland Indians baseball team. It might be something about rock and roll or film. But I always knew I was going to find something. And I think about Mrs. K a lot. I believe, you never really got to know her. Very difficult to talk to. I think she was hard of hearing. And if you talked to her and it wasn't loud enough, you kind of get yelled at back. It was kind of one of those quirky inner city urban places that perhaps don't exist anymore.
Was it like Rob taught at Eastern Michigan University? Was it like the place in Detroit on Telegraph Avenue? There was that beautiful old bookstore. I don't know if it's still there.
Yes,
it was a multi-story.
Yes, that's not Zubel. I can't remember.
It was named for someone. It was John Smith Books or whatever.
Right now I'm losing the title, but yes, it's like an old warehouse just filled with books. I remember once going to about 10 bookstores in and around Cleveland, Ohio, in order to find a science fiction novel. Here we go again, Mike, by Walter Miller called A Canticle for Leibowitz. It's post-Holocaust. That is post-nuclear Holocaust book, in which the great superpowers have practically destroyed the human race. There's been a great bloodletting and a destruction of libraries as the survivors believe that knowledge has led to destruction and technology of destruction. There's a Jewish guy who saved what he could. His name is Leibowitz, and in the future, he's kind of worshipped as a saint. They have documents from the original Hand of Leibowitz. It says, can of kraut, pound of pastrami, bring home for Emma. No one knows what it means. It's a shopping list. The monks are making an illuminated manuscript of. So, at any rate, there's another great science fiction book. But I used to love haunting bookstores so much. And God bless Barnes & Noble. I consider Barnes & Noble the last man standing. It's probably not. I know there are others. There are others out there. But whenever I travel, for example, in New Orleans right now, on Dauphine Street, there's Dauphine Street Books. And it is but we're sitting in a standard size office, business office here, Mike and I are. And so imagine, Mike, this room we're sitting in just stacked with books so tight you have to step over them on the floor. It's obviously a labor of love or perhaps a labor of obsession for the man who owns it. So maybe that's my current favorite.
All right. Well, this has been great. I've gotten a stack of books now that I need to read, a stack of titles to read.
Lowbrow.
I want to thank Rob. He just got off a plane from New Orleans. I know you've been traveling all day. I'm really delighted that you could come by and do this. And thanks a lot for coming, and welcome back home to Carlisle.
Oh, it's good to be back in Carlisle, Mike, and total props to what you're doing here.
Thanks a lot, Rob.
And that concludes our program. Thank you for listening. The views expressed in this podcast reflect those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views, policies, or positions of the U.S. Army or the Department of Defense. Let us know what you think. Provide us your feedback, comments, or suggestions through our webpage at warroom.armywarcollege.edu. And have a great day.